It was supposed to be about the economy. When we joined what was to become the European Union in the early 1970s, they said it was an economic proposition. Yes, they said, it might cost us a degree of self-government, but being in this new club was going to make us more prosperous. Who still believes that anymore? Looking across the channel, who really believes that being in the European Union makes us wealthier? It means less prosperity and less freedom and less self-government. It's not just the euro crisis, although that certainly somewhat undermined the credibility of those Europhiles who 15 years ago said that we would face calamity unless we abolished the pound. It's much more than just the euro crisis. We in the West right now face some extraordinary challenges, some extraordinary economic, technological, and demographic challenges. Economically, there is a vast shift in output and production from west to east. Demographically, Europe's population is aging. Europe's population is shrinking as a percentage of the world total. The populations of sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East and elsewhere are rising. And then technologically, it's not just black cab drivers who are going to face the challenge from Uber technology. We're going to start to see Uber-type technology doing what estate agents and bankers do, doing what doctors and designers do. Now, I'm not saying this is all bad, but the point is it's going to have a huge impact on us, these economic, technological, and demographic challenges. If we stay in the European Union, we're going to take an enormous risk. If we stay in the European Union, we're not going to be in a position to respond to these challenges. We're not going to make the changes that we're going to have to make to meet these challenges. The European Union was created in the mid-20th century. It's a product of the 1950s mindset. It's so outdated, it can't even control its own affairs. The European Union has lost control of its money. It's lost control of migration. We need to take back control. We need to leave the European Union and bring back control to this country. If we're going to have any chance of responding to these challenges that we face, we need to make sure that public policy is decided by a government that we elect, accountable to us, able to make policy not in the imaginary interests of 500 million people, but in response to the specific interests of the people of this country. Now, since the euro crisis began, not that long ago, 2006, 2007, I think it started. Since then, the output of China has increased by about 100%. The output of India has grown by, I think, about 80, 90%. The output even of Brazil and Mexico, who've had a few bumps along the way, is up by 40%. The output of the European Union has hardly shifted at all. The only indices that have increased in the European Union in that period are those that measure debt and unemployment. We're told by the federalists, we're told by politicians in London, yes, there's a lot wrong with the European Union, but hang on, can't we change it? Let's sit down, let's reform it, let's change it from within. I've spent most of my adult life listening to ministers. I can't remember which party they're in, they all sort of blend into one. But different ministers saying that Europe can be changed, that somehow being in the European Union can mean something different to what it does today. And Margaret Thatcher believed that being in the single market would make the EU more open, more deregulated. It's done precisely the opposite. Douglas Hurd, I remember, when I was in my early 20s, said that the Maastricht Treaty was the high water mark of federalism. It was just the beginning. John Major said that Europe was coming our way. He said that if we were at the heart of Europe, we could somehow remodel Europe in our own image. And then Tony Blair, he set out what was then called the Lisbon Agenda. This was a program that they proudly boasted of at the end of the last century, beginning of this century, which they said was going to make Europe the most dynamic part of the global economy by 2010. It's extraordinary that now David Cameron is using almost exactly the same sort of talk. Somehow he's trying to convince us that he is going to do what none of those previous prime ministers managed. But it's only talk. 3 years ago, at the time of his Bloomberg speech, 3 years ago almost to the day, January 3 years ago, he outlined what he said, using high-flown language, was going to be fundamental change. He said that there was going to be radical action to make Europe more competitive, radical change so that we would repatriate control over crime and justice and social and employment law. We now know that it's unlikely he's even got a deal over the relatively minor issue of in-work benefits for people from Poland. I mean, isn't it extraordinary how petty and pathetic and unworthy that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom's negotiating position is reduced to deciding whether someone who 3 years ago happened to be living in Warsaw, Poland, should get the same benefits as someone who happened to be living in Warsaw in the West Midlands? There is only one kind of EU membership on offer. And if Margaret Thatcher, John Major, Tony Blair and David Cameron can't get reform, maybe now's the time for us to recognise we're never going to be part of an EU club that we're comfortable in being part of. The European Union is not the free market club that Margaret Thatcher thought she was signing us up to. The single market is not about opening us up to trade, allowing free trade. Under the single market, you can only trade if you comply with a certain set of standardized rules. And who sets those rules? Who sets those standards? Who makes the regulations for everything? It's not done by benign technocrats wanting to make the world a better place. They'll have you believe that. No. They're drafted by lobbyists in Brussels, by corporate vested interests lobbying the European Commission and the European Parliament. If the EU was the common market that we thought we were joining, if it really was the common market that we thought we signed up to, business would spend their marketing budgets trying to persuade willing customers to buy their products at a price that they were happy to pay. But instead, with rules for everything, with rules that mean business needs permission for everything, big business, spends its marketing budget not on trying to persuade the customer what to buy, but on hiring that army of lobbyists in Brussels. There are 20,000 lobbyists working in Brussels, and they're funded by vested interests trying to rig those rules. Incidentally, that explains why one of Europe's few growth industries is corporate lobbying. It's precisely because the European Union is built by and for vested interests, which they've got a vested interest in, that so many people in Brussels work as lobbyists. Now, we're often told that business wants EU membership. How many times have we heard on the BBC, the Today programme, have we heard that business actually wants us to be in the European Union? Really? I can see why corporate lobbyists want us to be in the European Union. I can see why people who run big, successful lobbying companies in London want us to be in the European Union. But in my Essex constituency, I know 2 local businesses that in the past year alone have had to stop product lines because of EU regulation, precisely because they've been prevented from doing what they used to do. Don't listen to the Confederation of British Industry to speak for British business. They were wrong about joining the euro in the 1990s. They were wrong about the need for us to join the European exchange rate mechanism in the 1980s. They were wrong about prices and incomes policy in the 1970s. No. Listen instead to Jim Mellon here. Jim knows more about wealth creation and creating jobs than any of those people in pursuit of knighthoods in the CBI. Listen to Business for Britain, which has nearly 2,000 CEOs on its panel, who think that we would be better off if we left. Now, we're going to hear during the campaign people say, if we leave, we're not going to have access to the single market. If we leave somehow, this is going to prevent us from trading with Europe. Absolute nonsense. Now, I don't know about you, but I was out doing some Christmas shopping recently. I was out with my 6-year-old, and we were in a shop in Clacton. And we had to buy some Christmas tree lights. And it said on the packet, made in China. They're not in the European Union. We then moved along, I was dragged by the 6-year-old, towards the Swiss chocolate section. And we bought some Swiss chocolate. Now, I don't know if you should actually call it Swiss chocolate. The beans were, I think, grown in Ghana. Maybe it's Ghanaian chocolate made in Switzerland. I don't know, but none of those two countries are in the European Union. Then I got a text from my wife telling me not to forget the crackers. A text on an iPhone that was built using American design. They're not in the European Union. On a gadget that was full of South Korean chips. They're not in the European Union. And she said, don't forget to get a bottle of wine on the way home. I leave it to you to decide whether we got the Australian or the French wine. But the point is, it's perfectly possible to trade with the European Union without being governed by the European Union. Don't take Carswell family trips to the shop in Clacton as evidence of this. Look at the hard facts. This country is Germany's largest single export market. Germany is not going to want to stop people buying their wonderful cars and their wonderful products once we've left. Last year, we did something like £50 billion worth trade deficit. That means that we bought £50 billion more stuff off Europe last year than they bought off us. Can you seriously imagine that the European Union is going to want to erect trade barriers to restrict cross-channel trade from which they're the principal beneficiaries? Of course they're not. You know, if South Korea can have a free trade agreement with the European Union, I think the 5th largest economy in the world is going to be able to have a free trade agreement with the European Union once we're out. Now, once we've left the European Union, yes, we may well have to comply with single market regulations when we sell. But that's what everyone has to do. When you sell to a country, you have to comply with local regulations. That's what the people who made the Christmas crackers and the Christmas tree lights have to do. There's nothing unusual about that. But if we leave the European Union, we gain something quite remarkable. Let me put it like this. Imagine that this is 100% of the UK economy. The gap between my hands is 100% of everything that we make in this country this year. Now, 80% of that is entirely dependent upon trade within this country, people buying and selling things from each other in this country. 20% of the economy depends on trade outside this country, things we buy and sell from overseas. Of that 20%, less than half, 8% of the total is contingent upon trade with the European Union. Yet by being in the single market, we have to comply 100%, the economy must comply 100% with single market regulations brought in ostensibly to allow us to trade with that tiny 8%. Do you really imagine that hairdressers in Clacton should have to comply with rules brought in under the auspices of the single market when they're selling haircuts to people in Essex? Being in the European Union foists upon us regulation that we do not need, regulation that is brought in at the behest of vested interests, and we would be freer and wealthier and more successful without it. When I was first elected as a Member of Parliament in 2005, the total value of UK exports to the European Union that year was 63%. I think I'm right in saying that 2/3 of all the things we sold to the world went to the European Union. Today, it's down to 46%. It's a precipitous decline. The European Union declines with every set of trade figures. I think we can win this, and I think with your help we will win this. But what we need to do is we need to make these arguments, and we need to make them again and again. If we leave the European Union, yes, we will get self-government and we will be free. We'll be able to elect a government that we can hold to account directly for its successes and failures. No longer will ministers be able to come back from Brussels and pretend they can't make any changes. No longer will your local council be able to blame some unseen EU directive for their inability to empty the bins. But we need your help, and I think time is short. We need your help today. After this, I'm going to be joining a group of us who will be out leafleting. Can you also please sign up? Sign up to our campaign. Sign up to any campaign. June is not far away. October is not that much further away. This time next year, we could be out, but we're going to need the help of everyone here in this hall today to do it. Thank you.